Hello everybody and welcome to the Import-Export Hub channel. I'm Bogdan, and in today's video I will be covering the imports and the exports of France for 2020. By the way, if you slightly like this video, please hit the like and the subscribe buttons. It really means a lot for me. And let's not lose precious time and dive into the subject, and let me begin with the exports of France for 2020. Although we see here also the exports from 2016 onwards, just to have a larger view and see how the exports evolved over the last 5 years. Anyway, I won't insist much on this topic, and I will only highlight the fact that in 2020 the exports shrunk with more than 14% year on year, and it's understandable as COVID-19 hit really everybody. Now, in terms of major industries driving France exports, we see here a lot of high-ranked chapters like 84, 85, 88 or 90. And as I've told you in my previous videos, this is a good indicator that the economy of France is highly advanced and it's focused on high value added sectors. At least this is my personal screening process, if you want, and I don't know if mainstream economists will agree with me, but nonetheless I stick with what I believe. Now, in terms of exports, we see that the biggest driver is Chapter 84, followed by Chapter 87, and on the third place we have Chapter 85. I won't go further as you have the table for yourselves to analyze. I will want to point out the following two things. The first one, in this top 10 list of the biggest export drivers, we see that only Chapter 30, so pharmaceutical products, registered an increase, slight, but still an increase. And as you've probably guessed, this is driven mostly by the pandemic. And rest assured, as we will see in the import sheet, the same is true for the imports of pharma products in France also. The second thing I want to point out is the top 10 partners for France's exports. And we see here the list, and it's quite clear from this list that except the United States and China, the rest of the trading partners are located close or relatively close to France, making France exports not susceptible to disruptions in logistics if we consider the current problem of the huge freight rates for containers or the containers availability for that matter. Now careful, as I am not saying that having the export partners close is a good thing, as there might be a regional disruption or a regional crisis, and this can easily translate into low export performance. Anyway, the idea is to have the exporters relatively spread out all over the world in order to leverage the risk of some regional crisis. But this is more appropriate on the micro level, so for companies exporting, and not necessarily for countries. Now, moving on to the imports of France for 2020, again we see here that the trend was upwards until from 2016 until 2018, and beginning with 2019 the imports fell. As for 2020, the imports shrunk roughly 11% year on year. And I was telling you previously about the dynamics of the pharmaceutical sector, and we see here that in this top 10 list at least, this is the only sector who registered an increase compared to 2019 in terms of imports. And of course, it has to do with the COVID-19 pandemic. Analyzing the balance of trade for this top 10 list, we see that except the pharmaceutical sector and the aerospace sector, so Chapter 88, the rest of the chapters have a strong negative balance of trade. In terms of top top 10 trading partners, we see here that again, except the United States and China, all the others are located close or relatively close to France. And before I deep dive into the top 5 exports and import chapters in order to see the trading partners, I just want to point out that there are a lot of intra-chapter exchanges. So imports and exports in this top 10 list. The only two chapters that are not common to France's exports and imports are chapter 88 in the export flow and chapter 27 in the import flow. And again, this is a quick rule of thumb rather than an empirical analysis, and it's my opinion, of course, but this intra-chapter exchange means that France, as in the case with other developed countries, has some competitive advantages and specialization characteristics for those particular industries. So when you see the imports and the exports showing lots of common chapters in the top 10 sectors, for example, this is an indication about the fact that it's a highly specialized and developed economy. This is a common characteristic for all developed economies from Canada and the United States to South Korea, Japan, or Germany. Anyway, now let's move and dive in and see who are the main trading partners in terms of exports for France concerning chapter 84. And we see here that the biggest trading partner in terms of exported value is Germany, followed by the United States, and on the third place we have Spain. In terms of what does France export from this particular chapter, I've added here some examples for Germany and China, and we see that turbojets, turbopropellers, and gas turbines make up for the majority of exports towards Germany and China. And for Germany, there are also some large exports of bulldozers, graders, or excavators, for example, which is really intriguing, as I didn't expect France to be so active in this sector. In terms of year-on-year dynamics, at least for these top 10 trading partners, we see that all the exports fell, except with the Netherlands, who had almost 1% increase. Now moving on to chapter 87, we see here again Germany as France's top trading partner, followed by Spain, and on the third place we have Belgium. Now in terms of exported products, here I've added an example from Spain, and the main driver of France's exports towards Spain from this chapter is given by the parts and accessories subsection. And guys, I don't know if you are aware, but France has a really strong industry related to the automotive parts and components, and this explains why we saw this subsection as the main driver of France's exports towards Spain. Now analyzing the year-on-year change, we see here a lot of red and yellow and only one line in green, which is in relation with Turkey. Moving on to the next chapter, so chapter 85, we see again the Germans as the main trading partners for France, followed by Spain and then Belgium. In terms of exported products, here I've gave you an example for Belgium, who imported largely integrated circuits, and in fact the exports towards Belgium, together, of course, with those towards Singapore, had an increase year on year, which is totally understandable, at least for Belgium, as there was a huge demand for chips and integrated circuits. And if you remember, guys, earlier this year we had a huge shortage of chips and integrated circuits. Moving on to chapter 30, and we see here that Germany is no longer the main trading partner for France. Instead, we have the United States, followed by Belgium, and on the third place we have Germany. Now, in terms of year-on-year changes for this chapter, I've added both the absolute and the relative values, as 2020 was a special year, if you want, given this health crisis, and we see here some interesting dynamics. And for sure, the pharma companies in France and not only in France had a relatively good year. And if you look at the year-on-year relative column, I've highlighted with green all the countries towards whom France had its value increased compared to 2019. And in this list, we see that there is a lot of green. And even if I remove the increase given by a normal, so-called normal business development in terms of exports of about, I don't know, 1.5 to 2, maybe 2.5% in some countries, the figures are still high, if you ask me. Anyway, I don't want to blame the pharma companies or something like that. I just wanted to point out that in 2020, the majority of countries tried to stock as much pharma products as they could in order to fight the possible disruptions in the supply chain. And for sure, panic and hoarding-like ordering and buying behavior had an implication in this context. And yes, you might say that on aggregate level, both the absolute and relative increases are similar to the years before, but if you look into the numbers, you can see large absolute decreases in countries like Japan, the Russian Federation, United Kingdom, or the United States, just to cover the top 5 ones. And yes, maybe for the United Kingdom and Japan, this was already a trend, but not for the United States and the Russian Federation. Anyway, I won't overanalyze this, but I want to point out one thing. When analyzing the imports and the exports data, always put them into context, as they might show some interesting facts if you know how and where to look, of course. Anyway, let's move to the last chapter of France's exports, and we see here that the United States are the main partner, followed by Germany and the United Kingdom on the third place. And as you can see for yourselves in this top 10 list at least, almost all are in red, meaning a decrease compared to 2019. Only South Korea making a distinctive note, if you want, with almost 3% increase. I won't insist much. This was a terrible year for the aviation industry, at least for the commercial one. Orders were put on hold, the spare parts market and so on was practically put to a halt, as planes who were not reconfigured for freight had to be laid over. Anyway, just for your information, the main driver for this chapter, exports, are aircrafts, most probably commercial aircrafts, and I don't know if you are aware, but Airbus aircrafts are made in Europe, and I don't know exactly where, as I didn't done a research and this just popped into my mind. But I know that Airbus is a partnership between France, Germany, the United Kingdom, and Spain, if I'm not mistaken. I know for sure that the engines are manufactured by Rolls-Royce in the United Kingdom, and most probably they send them to the final assembly line in France. Maybe I really don't know where is the Airbus assembled, and it's very hard for me to find out who has the largest input in terms of added value in order to establish the country of origin, but most probably France is the one who is the exporter for the Airbus aircraft. Anyway, let's move to France imports, and we see that for chapter 84, China is the main trading partner, followed by Germany and the United States on the third place. In terms of year-on-year changes, most of them are negative, except China and the Netherlands, who had each approximately 6% increase. As for major importing products, I've given you an example from Italy, and it seems that the main driver for France's imports from Italy is the taps, cocks, and valves subsector. Anyway, let's move to the next chapter. And here we see that Germany is the main trading partner, followed by Spain, and on the third place we have again Italy. In terms of year-on-year changes, the biggest decreases are with Germany, the United Kingdom, Japan, and the Netherlands, while with Spain and Slovakia it seems to be a slight increase. And if you're asking yourselves why is Slovakia having the biggest increase, well, it's quite simply really. PSA Group has a factory in Slovakia, and the French people really love their Peugeot and Citroëns. Let's move to chapter 85. And we see here that China is the main trading partner, followed by Germany, and on the third place we see the United States. In terms of year-on-year changes, we see that the imports from Germany, Vietnam, and Tunisia fell the most, while the imports from China, Poland, the Netherlands, Italy, Spain, and Taiwan increased. And here I've added the main driver of Italian exports towards France from this particular chapter, and we see that the parts and accessories for tractors and motor vehicles subcategory was the main driver. Moving on to chapter 27, so mineral fuels and mineral oils, we see a lot of red as the demand shrunk. At least if we consider these top 10 trading partners. The main trading partner is Belgium, from which France imports mainly petroleum gas. On the second place we have the Russian Federation, and on the third place we have the United States. In terms of relative changes year on year, the biggest decrease was in relation with Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, and Kazakhstan. This is all about this chapter 27, and I think we are good to go and see the last chapter, which is Pharma Products. And we see here that the most important trading partner is Germany, followed by the United States, and on the third place we have Ireland. Now, in terms of year-on-year dynamics, we see positive changes, except with Switzerland, who had a 9% decrease. Anyway, so that's it, guys. I think I can draw some conclusions after this, after going through France's exports and imports. And those are, in my opinion, the following. First, France is a developed economy and has a complex array of products that have lots of added value. And the second conclusion is that France's main trading partners for both the export and the import flows are located in Europe. So on one hand, the imports and exports are not that much exposed to supply chain uncertainties, especially if we consider maritime trade. But on the other hand, France, as in the case with all major European exporting countries, is heavily reliant on these regional/continental partners. And the problem with these Western European countries is that in the near future, the population here will focus more on wealth-consuming behavior rather than on wealth production. So I do expect that the demand will somehow reach a plateau, and why not even fall. But this effect will begin, I don't know, in 10-15 years time. So all these exporters and entrepreneurs, especially the small and medium ones, will have to adjust their strategies and focus on more dynamic markets in the near future. Anyway, that's my opinion. I might be wrong, of course, but if I were an Western European, again, small or medium exporting company, I will surely pay close attention to some local or regional demographics and the spending or savings behavior. Anyway, that's it for today. I really hope I didn't bother you too much. Don't forget to comment and again, hit the like and the subscribe buttons. And until next time, keep your business safe. Thanks.